All right. Hello, Durud and Shalom. Guys, so as promised, we are going to be doing a series on understanding modern politics because we can't just be talking about what we're standing against. We have to understand what we are defending. We have to understand why we are defending Western liberal, classical liberal values, why we're defending liberty. And a lot of us don't even understand the basics of these concepts. We use words like republic, democracy, liberty, or even the negatives like communism and fascism, and we don't really understand what these words mean, what they stand for, what are the arguments for them, what are the arguments against them. So we have to go back to the basics and basically build the strong foundation so that when we're talking about these things, we know what the hell we're talking about, right? So, and by the way, a lot of us don't even know when we say Western values or classical liberal values or Enlightenment values or better okay, or the modern Republican tradition. That's a good one. We don't even know what the hell these things are. We don't know what we're talking about. So it's good to do these series so that you know. Uh, and after this, the next sessions that we're going to have is going to build on this, right? So this is just the beginning, and eventually we'll go through the history of philosophy and science of politics, both philosophy and uh, science of politics, and we will build on these. And if you follow these series, you're going to have a deeper understanding than the vast majority of the people out there. All right, let me actually make sure that my slides are ready and everything. I prepared these slides for you guys, and this is going to make it a lot easier to follow. Oh, shalom and durut to Jewish Samantha. Okay, fantastic. So, guys, this is we're going to be. It's just going to be the members here only. So this is not going to be as crowded as usual. It's just going to be us and you guys. So because this is a member only stream, and you guys, if there's anything that you don't understand, let me know in the chat so that we could. Oh, by the way, this first session that we're doing, I might make this one public at some point, but everything that comes after this is going to be for members only. Okay, Tora is here, Sam is here. Oh, okay, great. Sam is saying, always wanted to truly understand this topic. Fantastic. Well, this is the course for you. All right, so let's start with with the title, The Hidden Architecture of Our Politics, a deconstruction of the ideas that shape our world. And guys, there's few topics that are more important than this, at least in philosophy, because this is the part of philosophy that has a more direct impact on our lives than any other branch of philosophy. So I don't even know why more people are not understanding these concepts, um, given that everybody talks about politics, everybody is interested in politics, but nobody wants to really understand it so that they have more productive conversations about it. These courses will help you have a lot more productive conversations about politics, right? Actually, this is a good segue to this slide because it says we all use political philosophy, and you might think that that might be too much of a generalization. Does everybody use political philosophy? Yes, everybody does. Almost, yeah. It's not even almost because um, humans are inherently political animals. I mean, what is politics? Politics is whatever you do in a group, and whatever you decide in a group, as a group, for a group, by a group, is politics, right? Politics is humans in a tribe or in a group trying to come up with a mutual understanding for common interests, even though they have contradictory interests and goals. Sometimes they have to work with each other to try to compromise and figure out how to live next to each other. Basically, politics is the art of living next to each other, and because humans are social animals and they have to live next to each other, and they have to compromise, and they have to agree sometimes to disagree or agree to agree, and all of that is politics. I mean, we have been political since before civilization. Politics has been something that we have been dealing in since we've been tribe, like before civilization. It's not even, it's 300,000 years old. Okay, So when we say everybody uses political philosophy, every time, like for example, if you complain about the speed of your internet when you're gaming, that is politics, because you're complaining about some service not being offered to you properly. If you have been complaining about the price of something, even if you have been deciding with your friends in a party on what pizza to order, that is all politics. Okay, so everybody uses political philosophy. The only question is, are we using it well? And this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to figure out how to use it well. Amir saying shalom and durud. Yeah, this is just for members only. Yes, that's why it's not very crowded here. Okay. All right. So political philosophy asks the normative questions: what ought political arrangements be? Okay, so it's normative means not descriptive, right? So political science is about descriptive questions. Political philosophy is about normative questions, right? So descriptive means these are things, how things are, right? So for example, if I say the wall of this room is colored gray, okay, that's descriptive because you're describing things. Okay, but if you say, but the wall of this room should be colored purple, now you're making an odd, you're saying, you're basically, that's a normative claim, right? So this is how things ought to be. When you're saying how things ought to be, that's normative. When you're describing how they are, that's descriptive. So political philosophy is normative questions, how things should be in politics. Political science is about it's descriptive. It describes how things are. It just notices and describes how things are. Shalom, shalom, Ginga. So far, so good. Let me know if you're understanding this, because I really want to build a very strong foundation for us, the people who follow these. I want us to be like experts at these topics, okay? And I'm trying to make it very, very, very simple, right? So that we all understand it, okay? So it's a part of philosophy. So political philosophy is a part of philosophy with the most influence in the real world. Other parts of philosophy is not very, doesn't impact our day-to-day lives that much, but political philosophy does. We use political ideas and slogans constantly, often without knowing their full implications or historical consequences. The goal is to understand these ideas, where they came from, and the arguments for them. Okay, and also arguments against them. And by the way, when we say the arguments for them, we're also talking about the ones that we don't like, right? We're going to, through this series, we are going to argue for and against democracy, and arguments for and against even fascism and communism, so that we understand where other people are coming from, right? So the goal is to understand these ideas, where they come from, and the arguments for them, to know what our own ideas truly mean, and make more informed decisions. And by the way, when I say more informed decisions, it means that a lot of people have just dogmatically accepted certain things as good and certain things as bad, right? But we want to be able to defend them. Like if we say democracy good, why democracy good? Because if you ask so many people, they will say like, well, it's good that majority has the rules. Obviously, like, okay, but why? Like, well, because that's what the majority wants. Okay, but why should the majority get what it wants? Like, why is that a good thing? And then a lot of people get stuck there. Like, they don't know. Like, they just accepted that liberty is good, freedom is good, democracy is good. These things are good. Like, but when you ask them, like, but why? But why? They don't have a good answer for these. And we here, we want to have a good answer for all of these things, right? All right. So as we go through these series, okay, these courses, you're going to notice that we have two challenges, okay? Because we're going to be talking about words, and words are supposed to have meaning, but the meanings change. So sometimes we don't know what the hell we're talking about, because the meanings of the words that we're using are changing depending on the time and the location that we're using them, right? Well, actually, let's look at these two challenges. Okay, for example, political philosophy represents two key challenges: the political continuum hypothesis and the shifting. That's number one, and shifting meanings. So, what's political continuum hypothesis? Is It is the nature of politics to constantly multiply positions between any two political theories. Another will be invented. So if you have, say, this is position A, but these people, this is position B. As soon as you have position A and B, then position C is going to introduce itself at some point somewhere between position A and B. That's going to happen, okay, at some point. So this is one. Two, shifting meanings. The definition of key terms like liberal, democratic, right and left vary dramatically among these different positions and also among different time and location. So for example, the word liberal in the United States gives you the impression that somebody is left-leaning. But the same thing, the word liberal in Iran, gives you the impression that somebody is right-leaning. Okay, why, for example, is that the case? Because in the United States, there was a period of time where conservatives were being anti-liberal. They wanted more government involvement, right? So they were being anti-liberal, right? And the liberals were basically their enemies. So they came to the understanding that liberal means left, and it became the norm that liberal means left in the United States, right? And then in Iran, the main enemies of liberal ideas were the communists. So the communists ended up seeing liberals as their enemies. I mean, technically, in the United States, even in the United States, the progressive left sees liberals as their enemy, which they are, right? But it depends on which movement is making a bigger deal against liberalism. So if a period of time conservatives are being more anti-liberal, then liberal becomes left. Right now we're transitioning to an area where maybe to a time in the United States where progressive left is saying that liberals as the devil, right, as the evil. But Iranians have a bigger history of communists in Iran seeing liberals as being the enemy. So because the communists were left, liberal being the enemy, so liberal in many people's eyes ended up being something right-leaning, right? So this is a good example, right, for how different people have different perspectives. So far, so good. All right, so this is a very beautiful slide that breaks down things for us. Okay, so taking the machine apart, let's look at what we have here, right? So what we're dealing here in modern politics is a machine that is new. This machine is new. So this is the machine that is basically most societies are now running their society by, like, using. This is the engine of most modern societies. Okay, it used to be so many different other things, right? But now, what is this machine that politics in the modern world is running on? A lot of people call it democracy. So our modern form of a free, equal, self-ruling society is off by a lot of people. They just call it a democracy. Like, oh my God, this is a modern world. So what do we have now that is common that we didn't have before? They call it democracy. But this is not very accurate. That's not what that doesn't really paint a good picture of what this machine is that now is so common and widespread and most, the de facto system that people go by, right? What we should be actually calling it is modern liberal republic. And why shouldn't we call it a democracy? We will see. There's actually three different concepts that we have to understand, their differences, and how they work with each other. One is a republic, democracy, and liberalism, right? A lot of people keep using these words interchangeably. They're not interchangeable, and they're different, and they work with each other. And we will understand if you understand this very basic concept, which we will go over, you will understand politics more than 99% of the people out there. Okay, so what we have today in the modern Republican tradition, or what we call the Western way of doing politics, or the classical liberal way, the framework of doing modern politics, is a modern liberal republic. That's the entire machine, and it has democracy in it. The framework is republic, and the values and the principles are liberalism. And we will go over each one of them. Okay. So this system is built from several distinct and powerful concepts. To understand it, we must first examine each component on its own. So let's go through them, okay? Guys, this is Very fascinating and very interesting to me. I don't know if you guys are finding this interesting. This is, to me, this is pretty cool. Okay. All right. So let's start with the republic. Okay. What is a republic? And okay. So a republic is, you have a republic when you have a system where the source of political authority comes from the people. Okay. So when you're talking about a system that is a republic, the main feature, not the only feature, we will go over some other important features of a republic, but the main feature is that in a republic, a republic is a society which political authority flows from the people, not from a king or a queen. And you could also see that the two revolutions that gave birth to republics, which is the French Revolution and the American Revolution, were basically fighting against the rule by the king, right? By king. So far, so good, right? This is, so what is this principle is called popular sovereignty. It's something I need to add that is not on the slide here, which is very important, because the image, you could see the image is putting a have a crown that is basically rejecting a crown, and you can see that the flow of authority is comes from the people. Okay. So here's the thing, this might suggest, and because the two revolutions that gave birth to a republic comes from people who were fighting against monarchs, a lot of people think that a republic is inherently anti-monarch. That is not the case. For example, we have right now modern republics like the UK, like Netherlands, like Sweden, like Denmark, or like in some ways like Japan. These are modern republics that have monarchs, right? So having a monarch doesn't make you not a republic. The key is who is sovereign. Where does political authority come from? If sovereignty comes from the people, even if you have a monarch, you are still a republic. Okay, so for example, if you have a, like, maybe even people use their political authority to decide that we do want a monarch, right? So as long as the political authority is coming from the people, you are a republic. So constitutional monarchies, because they're constitutional monarchies, they're still a republic. That's a very key thing to understand. Let me guys know if you guys are good, or everything is understandable. Let me know in the chat, because I want to make sure that we're not going over anyone's head. I basically, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that the source of my information is basically Professor Lawrence Cahoon from the Great Courses and from the College of the Holy Cross. Okay, so I basically went and I took academic courses and then studied the material, and then I tried to bring it to you in a very much more easy to understand way than the academic course presented these, so the original source that I studied them from. Okay, so, and also I tell you my sources, so you don't think that I'm just making this stuff up. But by the way, anything that I add that is not on the slide is basically my own information and my own understanding. But anything that I tell you from the slide comes from the sources that I'm using. Okay. Right. All right. So the term arose in opposition to royalism. Royalism basically is the opposite of republicanism, and the idea that sovereignty comes from the king or the queen, right? So a critical distinction: the source of authority, the people, may be different from the agency that exercises that authority. Okay, so which is the government. So hypothetically, the source of the authority could be also the one that is exercising that authority, but that's not necessarily the case, and that's actually almost never the case, right? So just because we have a government that is doing, exercising the authority, on behalf of the people, okay, that doesn't mean that the authority doesn't come from the people. So even like if you have a king that is using the political power that the people have given to him, or if you have a president, or if you have a prime minister or parliament or whatever, so if you're saying that somebody else is basically uh, using political power, that doesn't mean that they are the authority. The authority could still be coming from the people. And usually you could see if the authority comes from the people based on whether or not the people could fire that person or replace it, or replace the people who are doing this. So the level of influence, if the legitimacy of the institution or if the people who are exercising this political power comes from the people, that means that the sovereignty belongs to the people, right? So, and also, by the way, that's a good segue because we have the sovereign people refers to citizens, not all residents, but sovereign people are basically the part of the population within the geographical area who are citizens, which means that they have political power, right? That means the people are so. So we have gone through to. We are now in an era where the people are sovereign. It's not the king is not sovereign. It's the people who are sovereign, right? This makes sense? Everything good? All right. So that was the concept of a republic, which means sovereignty belongs to the people. The flow of authority comes from the people. But you might think, well, isn't that the democracy? Okay, so let's look at the democracy, and then after we go and look at the difference between what a republic is and what democracy means. Okay, so democracy means the power of the people. So again, this is hard for me to spell. Etymologically, oh, I did it well. Etymologically, democracy means rule by the people. In practice, because people disagree, it must mean majority rule. So we cannot have rule by the people because people disagree. So in practice, so democracies should mean rule by the people, but because people disagree, in practice, democracy means majority rule. So whatever the majority says, that's what goes. So given what we said a republic is, any republic must have some democratic body that votes on government or laws, who the government is, what the laws are. So given that a republic needs to have rule by the people, it needs to use democratic institutions to be able to channel that authority so that the people could have their say over the government and the law. So you can see a republic uses democratic institutions, uses democracy. Democracy is the mechanism of popular action within the republic structure. Like, okay, I mean, if a republic uses democracy, then why can't we just call it the same thing? Because let me see, is that the next slide? Yes. Okay. Because using democratic values and using democratic institutions within a republic is not the only feature of a republic. That's one of the features. A republic uses democratic principles and methods and institutions. However, there is a big tension. This is the first point of tension between a republic and a democracy. And this is very important for you to understand, because many times people complain about, oh my God, democratic principles have been violated. This is not a real democracy. And then if you understand this, you realize that they should be. In a republic, there's supposed to be a tension with democracy. Okay? We're not going for absolute democracy. We're going for a republic. This is why many times people say the United States is not an absolute democracy. It's a republic. And this is important for everybody to understand. Right? Because democracy is majority rule. And majority rule could lead to the tyranny of the majority. And we don't want that. We don't want the tyranny of the majority. Okay? The whole point, what classical liberals are trying to do is to liberate the individual from all sources of from anything that could limit their liberty. And usually that's either the government or majority. Usually the government, if you give too much power to the government, so you want some democracy so that the individual could have some influence over his destiny, but you don't want too much democracy so the majority cannot force its way on the individual, and you don't also want to give too much power to the government so that the government cannot force its way on the individual and take its liberty away, right? So let's focus on this. The first point of tension between a republic and a democracy. So here's the thing: republic and democracy are not the same. A republic is the broader system that includes, but also purposefully limits democratic power. If you understand this, you're going to be able to make sense of all the future courses that we're going to be doing here. Okay. And guys, we're going to go through so much stuff. We're going to go through Hobbes. We're going to go through John Locke. We're going to go through Rousseau. We're going to go through John Stuart Mill. We're going to go through Ayn Rand. We're going to go through so many things. So we're going to go through Marx. Okay, but these are the first bricks that we need to lay here so that everything makes sense. So let me read that again because this is very important for you to understand. Okay, a republic. Okay, so the republic and democracy are not the same. A republic is the broader system that includes, but also purposefully limits democratic power. Okay, so how does it limit that? And then we will also, in the future, next slides, we will see why does it limit that? Why isn't democracy good? Why are we limiting democracy? So there's three key limits on majority power. There's three different ways that majority power is being limited: representation, constitutions, written or unwritten, individual rights. And I think we should say individual rights and minority rights. We should have both of them there. Okay. So what does representation mean? Representation means that you as an individual don't go and decide what the laws are. Okay. You don't vote on the laws. You vote on a representative, and your representative goes and figures out what the laws should be. So the majority elects representatives rather than passing laws themselves. So this separation means that you're not this people, the majority are not picking the laws themselves. And because there's a separation, there's 1 degree of separation, that means that the majority doesn't get to decide the laws, right? So this puts some limitation on democracy, because in republics, so in the same way that we don't want absolute democracy, we don't also want direct democracy. So we have absolute democracy versus limited democracy, which is a republic. And also we have direct democracy, where people would vote on the laws directly themselves, versus a representative democracy. But what we're learning here today is that making it representative also makes it somewhat limited, because no people cannot vote unless there are some referendums. People cannot pick their laws themselves. And then we have constitutions, written or unwritten rules. And also, for example, written like in the United States, unwritten like in Israel or in United Kingdom. But these are certain laws that people understand to be the, that act like they work like the Constitution, right? So these are written or unwritten rules that limit the power of government, including the legislature. So even if the majority decides, I don't know, to bring slavery back, they can't, because the Constitution doesn't allow that. For example, right? If the Constitution, if the majority rules that, we want to make a law, for example, that discriminates against these group of people, so the Constitution limits that. And by the way, the third one, which is individual rights, individual or minority rights, that could actually be in the Constitution. So individual rights guarantees of what majorities it's a guarantees of what majorities cannot do to minorities. And so, for example, this is very important for example, for Jews, for atheists, for infidels, for ethnic minorities if they're being discriminated against. So basically having ways to make sure that the majority cannot just force its way on minorities or individual people just because they have higher numbers. Higher numbers shouldn't mean that you get to have the tyranny of the majority. Okay, so there needs to be some limitation. So these limits are fundamentally non-democratic features within a republic system. These are limitations on majority rule, so they are non-democratic. And this is why you now learn that non-democratic doesn't necessarily mean it's not necessarily bad. A constitution is non-democratic. The judicial branch of the government, that's non-democratic to some extent, depending on how you choose the judge, how long they get to live, right? So if you have a constitution, that is a limitation on democracy, and that's a good thing. Now, this is our interesting part. Liberalism. Okay? Liberalism. What the hell is liberalism? Okay, because we keep using that word. We keep using that word, and we think that we know what we're talking about, but many, often people do not, right? And people, it's interesting because people sometimes use liberal country and democratic country interchangeably, and now you're going to learn that that's not the case, right? So we learned about democracy. We learned about what a republic is. So the republic is the framework, and the republic uses democracy, but it wants to limit the democracy. It wants to use certain principles so that the majority rule cannot violate, even if they have the majority vote, right? So, but what those principles are, what are those principles, right? So we have the majority that wants something, and the republic wants to limit them in what they get to have, even though most of the time wants to make sure that the rule and power, political power, comes from them. But there should be some limitation. The principles, there are certain principles, So, for example, one republic will use some principles to limit the majority rule, and another republic will use some other principles that you cannot violate, even if you have the majority vote. So liberalism is a set of principles within a republic that the majority cannot violate. So there's a set of principles that decides what is it that gets limited in a democracy, right? So, and the most important thing that liberalism wants to focus on, the principles that it introduces to limit the rule of the majority, is based on the ultimate goal of protecting the individual, protecting the individual's liberty. And this is why it's called liberalism, because liberalism is a set of principles that wants to protect the liberty of an individual. So let's define it. And those principles are going to be the limiting factors in a republic on majority rule. Let me know if you understand this, because this is very important, because this is what we're defending. This is what we're defending. So I need you guys to tell me if you understand it. Okay, so the key definition: classical liberalism refers to a republic with a high degree of individual liberties and a free market economy. By the way, the free market economy is also in line with a high degree of individual liberties, like they go hand in hand. So when you say individual liberties, that's political. When you say free market economy, that's economical. But both of them is about limiting other people and messing up with your private life and the way you do business. You guys understand? You're with me? I see people. Let me know if everything is understandable. Just confirm with me if it's difficult. Let me know if it's difficult, if you didn't understand anything. Okay. I want to make sure that everybody gets what we're talking about here. Okay. So, core principle: liberalism requires limits on both government power. Okay. Yes. Fantastic. Thank you. So, core principle. Okay. So this is before I tell you the core principle. You have to understand. Look at this image. You see the individual, and you see there's a shield around this individual. That shield is liberalism. And what are the main threats that we're trying to protect this individual from? Is government power and majority rule. So there's two sources of power that if it becomes too powerful, individual liberties will be challenged, and those are the two things that the shield is trying to protect the individual from: too much government power and majority rule. Okay, so liberalism requires limits on both government power and the majority's ability to restrict individual freedom. All right, so Tora, I don't think you understand what liberalism is. Just bear with me in the future slides, because when you say anarchy and degeneracy, that means that you do not know what liberalism means. Okay, we're talking about classical liberalism. We're not talking about how some conservatives in the United States define what liberalism means. That's what you're talking about. I think it's progressive left. So just be patient, because what you have learned about what liberalism stands for is not accurate. So let's just try to be patient and go through these slides so that you have a better understanding of what we're talking about here. Okay, because liberalism actually protects against anarchy and oh, I don't know what you mean by degeneracy, but chaos and whatever you are afraid of. Okay, liberalism is actually the framework that created the modern nation state. No. Okay, so it doesn't mean liberalism doesn't mean freedom, because liberalism is against absolute freedom. Because to protect the individual, you need some a framework, and you need the rule of law. Liberalism needs is actually the best framework for the rule of law because you need the rule of law to protect the individual. So that's why I'm saying be patient. We have to reintroduce you guys to these concepts. Just throw away the things that you might read on the internet away. We will tell you all of this. You cannot have liberalism without a strong way to enforce the rule of law. Okay, so what we're saying, core principle: liberalism requires limits on both government power and the majority's ability to restrict individual freedom. This is actually very important, because a lot of people think that the laws are meant mostly for the people. Okay, but liberalism is the understanding that laws need to limit the government as well. In fact, its main purpose is to limit the government. Okay, because if you limit the people too much and you don't limit the government, then the government is going to become the source of political authority, and it's just going to rule over the people rather than representing the people, right? So the number one purpose of laws should be to limit the government before it limits the people, and also limit majority rule, right? So these are the two things that we need to figure out how to hold back to some extent. But that doesn't mean, when we say majority rule, we're not being anti-democratic, because we need democracy for the individual to be able to have its influence as well. So this is a very hard balance. How do we have enough democracy for the individual to have political power, but not too much democracy for the individual to be basically finding a tyrant, being oppressed by the majority? These are conversations we're going to have in our upcoming courses, right? So, historical note: one method to guarantee liberty is through natural rights. Have you guys heard the term natural rights? Let me know. Okay. So, if you've read, like, for example, the Declaration of Independence, United States, inalienable rights, by God or by nature. These are, so when we talk about natural rights, we are basically introducing the idea that human beings, just by have God-given or nature-given rights. It's basically the rights is part of nature. It's basically written within the fabric of the universe. It's part of reality, right? But I don't believe in that. So that's not the only way to argue for individual rights, okay, to guarantee liberty. But historically, through the Age of Enlightenment, the first people who introduced individual rights and wanted to guarantee liberty, it was by philosophizing and arguing that these rights are natural or God given. So we have to respect nature. But the other view is that no, they're not God given. Rights are not something that you find in nature, and that rights are something that we create as human beings. And we create them because they have utility. And guess what? The people who say that are usually utilitarians. So people who might be virtue ethicists or deontologists, they might, when they have those types of moral philosophy, they might think like, oh yeah, people should have individual rights because, or religious ethics. So if you have, we have deontology, or these are just different moral philosophies, deontology or virtue ethicists or divine command theory by religious people. They're like, God gives us the rights, or nature gives us the rights, or logic gives, and these are people who, if they want to figure out what should our rights be, this is a process of discovery. The rights already exist. We now have to figure it out, either by reading scripture or by using logic to be able to decode nature, like Kant, for example, did, or whatever, right? To go and figure out what these natural rights are. It's already in nature. We need to go find them. Okay, it's already given by God or given to us by nature. We need to go find what these rights are, right? And because they're natural, then the argument is that no government should take them away because it's a gift from God or from nature, and it's inherent part of nature. So government should not be unnatural. Government should not violate the natural laws of the universe, right? So that's one understanding. But utilitarians, for example, like John Stuart Mill, think that's baloney, think that's bullshit. Rights don't come from nature. Rights are something that we create, and we create them for good reason. So basically, it's the understanding of are rights more like an apple, or are they more like watches? So if rights are like apple, like comes from nature and you go pick it from nature, or is it like a watch? Is it like something that we create because it has utility? So utilitarians like John Stuart Mill, which we will discuss in much more detail in a future course, thinks it's more like a watch. It's something that we create because it's good. It's as utility. So yeah, philosophers like John Stuart Mill defended individual liberty without believing in natural rights. All right, so you can see the tension here, right? With the tension between democracy and liberalism. So we had one point of tension between the republic and democracy. But again, liberalism is now, if a republic wants to use liberal principles to limit democracy, so now we have a tension between liberalism and democracy. And this is really important to understand because many people use liberalism and democracy interchangeably, but they're at odds with each other. Okay. So democracy wants to give all power to the people. Liberalism wants to limit the amount of power there is to have. So you can see liberalism is on the right, democracy is on the left, right? These two core values are in constant state of tension. Democracy emphasizes the power of the majority to make decisions for the society. Liberalism emphasizes the rights of the individual and minority, which must be protected from that majority power. I mean, for example, if you're a Jew in America or in Netherlands, I think you might see the value of liberalism. But if you're a Jew in Israel, you might be seeing more the value of democracy. Because if you're a Jew in a country that the majority is not Jew, then you're like, well, I want protection from what the majority can do from me. So I like liberal principles, right? But if you're a Jew in Israel, you might be more interested in democracy because, hey, like, why is it that there's more of us and we want something and it's not happening? Well, that's a good example, right? All right. So this is very interesting because here's the what happens when you give the people political authority. And this is a new idea, by the way, right? So this is modern. It's very modern. Yeah, yeah. You guys like my real life examples? I just came up with that on the spot, by the way. That was a pretty good example, I think. Okay. All right. So here's what happens when you give people political authority. You take it from kings and queens and emperors or whatever, or caliphs, and you give it to the people. What happens is that they now want to use that political authority. And how do they end up using it? They look at their lives and they look at other people's lives. And if other people's lives are better, they were like, well, I want to be like that. Like, why are they over there all the way up there and I'm all the way down here? So this is one of the most important things that happens in uh, modern politics. The word equality becomes such a major topic, more than it has ever been in the history of politics before. Because before, when you have kings and lords, right, or emperors, it's only natural for them to be up there and you to be down here. That's how it is. Okay. But now when you tell people, well, actually you're the one in charge, you are the one sovereign, you have political authority, they're like, oh yeah, then why am I poor? Then why am I over here and you're all the way up there? Okay. We need to make things equal in some way, right? So this is why in the modern politics, the issue of equality becomes a major topic. Okay, this is why. The wild card, and here's an interesting thing that most people don't understand is when we talk about equality, we're not talking about one thing. So, given how important equality is in the modern Republican societies, we need to figure out what the hell are we talking about when we say equality. And guys, is equality a barrier to liberty? Is it? Or is it helpful? Well, let's find out. So, modern Republican societies are historically egalitarian, but equality is not a single concept. It can mean very different things. So, let's look at them. So, when we talk about equality, are we talking equal political power? Are we talking about equality before the law? Are we talking about equal opportunity? Or are we talking about equal holdings? Are these the same? Are these all good? Are these all bad? So, equal political power means one person gets one vote, which can be challenged by the fact that even if one person has, every person gets to vote and their vote is valued the same, certain people have bigger audiences and they could influence other people's votes. So, they have more political power. Certain people are richer and they could spend money on promoting a certain politician, so they have more political power. But the thing is that the ballot box is an equalizer, even though you could never make it equal, and you shouldn't try to make it completely equal. It makes sense that people who succeed in a way succeed to produce more and generate more wealth and generate better system to also have some more political power, to have more influence. This is my opinion, by the way. This is not from the source, right? But you also need to make sure that influence doesn't become too much, and that's why the ballot box is an equalizer but not a complete equalizer. It only equalizes it to some extent. That's the point. So we have the power of the ballot and the power of the wallet. The power of the wallet is not equal. The power of the ballot is supposed to be somewhat equalizing, but it never ends up equalizing completely, and we shouldn't try to make it that way. That's my opinion, right? So then we have equality before the law, which is, in my opinion, the most important one and the best one to promote, right? To make it completely equal. Laws apply to all citizens in the same way. And I think from all four of these, number two is the one that we could make the most equal, and we should be trying the most equal. None of these other ones. So one and three are good, but you can never make it complete equal. Number 4 is the most destructive, and you shouldn't even try to make it equal. Number 2 is the one that you could make it completely equal, and it's only beneficial. And then we have 3, equal opportunity. Everyone has a fair chance to succeed. And again, you can never make this completely equal because there's always going to be differences that gives people certain advantage. But as long as you have number 2, I think you also have enough of number 3. As long as you have enough of number 2, I think you're going to have enough of number 3, right? And then this is the fourth one is the most destructive idea in the modern world, which is equal distribution of wealth or resources. And we will get back to this soon. All right, so when it comes to liberty, I think number 2 is good for liberty. Number 1 is good for liberty. Number 3 is good for liberty. But number 4 is the one that is basically challenges liberty. So the crucial issue isn't a simple conflict between liberty and equality, but rather which kind of equality is compatible with and necessary for liberty, which we will get into in much more detail in future. Right. So by the way, this slide, if you look at the slide that we had before, here, this one that we took them this one where we took them apart, democracy, liberalism, and republic. So now in this slide, we're now putting them all together. Okay. But when we're putting them all together, it causes conflict. And we might think that's a bug. Okay. We might think like, oh my God, there's so much. If we reassemble this machine, we have an architecture of conflict. So is that bad? The issue is, by the way, you see the blue here? The blue is basically the republic, which is holding everything here together. The green is democracy, which is basically keeps the republic running. And the yellow is basically the shield, which holds democracy back to a certain degree, right? And putting it all together, then you have a republic. So here's the thing, given that there's going to be so much conflict in here, then what is this a failure of this system? Is this the failure of this machine? Well, not necessarily, because you're always going to have conflict in politics. Politics is basically the art of managing conflicts between different people's interests while making them work with each other. That's what politics is, right? So the conflict is always going to be there, even before a republic. I mean, we always had conflict. But the genius of the modern republic, the modern liberal republic, is not that its parts fit together perfectly without any conflict. Its strength and dynamism come from the managed conflict between its core principles. So the reason why we defend the modern liberal republic is the way its efficiency in managing the conflict. Because the conflict will always be there. People living with each other. I mean, guys, if you ever had a roommate, you could tell that 2 people living together are going to have conflict. Okay, who does the dishes? Who takes out the garbage? Who's partying all night while the other one is trying to sleep because they have an exam tomorrow? 2 people living with each other are going to have conflict. So obviously, a society of 10 million, 30 million, 90 million, 100 million people living together and trying to figure out how to not to step on each other's toes are going to have conflict. So what we have a system here is not a system that gets rid of the conflict. It's the best system invented by mankind when it comes to managing this conflict. That's what we have when it comes to the modern liberal republic. All right, so we have 5 foundational and conflicting values in the modern liberal republic. So, and these are the values. And if you look at all the tension in politics, is because you care about one of these more than the others, and there's somebody that you're fighting against cares about the other one more than you could basically demonstrate that most wars and tensions in politics, in modern politics, comes from you valuing different people valuing one of these more than the other. And to be fair, all of these five are good things, but what you care about the most defines the political group that you're in. So if you actually look at every single political movement or any political party or any form of activism is basically in favor of fighting for one of these against the other one. And the good thing is that they're all good. The bad thing is to get one of them, you need to kind of sacrifice the other. To get any of these, you need to sacrifice some of the other to be able to get them. And that's the challenge. Okay. Neil Bunny. Okay, Neil Bunny. Wow, you're such a good roommate then. Okay. So, most modern Republican theories are based on at least 5 values. They all matter, but they are often in conflict. Emphasizing one over the other leads to a fundamentally different political system. And it's interesting, but guys, because if you look at anybody, any group, or any movement that you know, or any political entity, you could actually define what they stand for by looking at this chart and looking at what they're focusing on and which one of these values in this chart they're sacrificing and which ones they're focusing on. So let's look at the 5 values. We have popular self-governance, which is basically, so let's go with the 3 that we already talked about and then go the 2 other ones. Okay, so we have popular self-governance, which is the democratic principle. And then we have individual liberties, which is the liberal principle. We already know the tension between these two, right? And then we have equality, which is the egalitarian principle. And many of the egalitarian principles that you have to fight for kind of require sacrifices of democratic principle or the liberal principle. We already know that, right? So let's look at the 2 other ones. So the communal preservation or the national principle, right? So for example, in Iran, if you say, okay, I don't care what the majority says or what if this is going to violate equality or individual liberties, but the Shahnameh is such a foundational part of this country's identity that we need to, or our culture or certain values, that we need to just preserve it. This is just such a shared part of who we are that that if we lose it, we're just going to lose who we are as a nation or who we are as a people. So this is worth preserving, even if somehow it violates some of these other things on this chart, right? Or you might say that's about some of your traditions or some of your religious, principles, or that you think that it defines your country, or your heritage, or anything like that. Anything communal that is shared among society, and you want to focus on preserving it because it has certain values for your nation, and you think it's so important that we need to protect it at all costs. Right? So maybe you want to put that in your constitution to be like, you know what, we don't, whatever happens, we're not getting rid of this because it's so important. Right? So that would be the communal preservation, which is the national principle, right? And then we have economic and material modernization, which is the progress principle. So you might think that, you know what, I'm a king and I don't gonna, whatever the population says, I don't care. We are building a shit ton of factories, a shit ton of universities, because we're modernizing. And if they don't like it, they don't like it. It doesn't matter. We are basically modernizing this entire country. And okay, so for example, 2 examples that I could think of people that were focusing on this value were Ataturk and Muhammad Reza Shah, for example, right? They were very basically, their emphasis was on this value more than, so for example, Muhammad Reza Shah was focusing on communal preservation, economic and material modernization. He was also doing a little bit focusing on popular self-governance by giving the woman the right to vote. Okay, so but you can see that his main focus was modernization, right? That was his like Muhammad Reza Shah was doing that, and also Ataturk, right? So again, every time, so the art, what you have to figure out as a nation or as a society is to how to balance all these five, and depending on your situation and that you're in at the moment, which one of these things requires more focus than the other ones, right? And again, the figuring out the balance is very difficult, and we were going to, in our future courses, we're going to go look at what different political philosophers, how they address each one of these. Okay, by the way, I think we're gonna, after we go through ancient Rome and ancient Greek, we're gonna start with Machiavelli, and then we're gonna go to John Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes, and then we're gonna go all the way from the beginning of the philosophers from in modern times to present time, and we're going to basically look at every single one of them. And you can see that most of the time we're talking about a tension between some of these five values here. All right, so is there a right answer? Is there a right way to govern? Right? So the way to answer to that question is, well, what is right? And if you want to answer what is right, then we're going to go into moral philosophy and ethics, right? So this is moral philosophy is the foundation for political philosophy. Because before you want to judge what is the right way to govern, you have to understand what is right and what is wrong. So this is why under looking at political philosophers, it always helps to understand what their moral philosophy is, right? So if you want to look at different moral systems really quickly, we're not going to go do moral philosophy for these courses, but we have utilitarians, which think that whatever has the highest utility is the right thing to do. We have virtue ethicists, which have a set of virtues that they think those are the right things to do. And then we have deontologists that they just use logic to figure out. I mean, that's just really stupid. Their idea is that, I'm very dumbing it down. Their idea is that anything that if everyone else does it, if this becomes the rule that everybody abided by, if the action that you're doing becomes a rule for everybody, does that make the world a better place? So they're trying to use that type of logic to figure out what is right and what is wrong. And then we have the divine command theory, which comes from the idea that, well, God tells us what's right and what's wrong, right? So these are the four most famous ones, right? And then we have, but all of these four are moral realists, right? Moral realists are moral realists are people who believe that there is a right and wrong. There is actually an answer. Like for every action, you could say that this is right and this is wrong. But then we also have another category of people who are moral relativists, who don't think there is an answer to this question. It just depends on who you're asking. And it's basically whatever those people say. So we have to, most modern political philosophers are moral realists, but it's important to understand that we also have moral relativists who are kind of cuckoo, in my opinion. And they are also, even though in modern politics most philosophers are more realist, in recent times um, because of far lefty politics and some, I don't know, some critical theory and some other new things that have showed up. We also have moral relativists becoming more influential. So we're going to take them more seriously when we get closer to our time. But for most of the time, most political philosophers were moral realists. So we only have to figure out which moral philosophy they had among these four, right? I myself am a utilitarian, so I'm going to be biased towards utilitarians like John Stuart Mill. And many of them are deontologists, as you see. They follow Kant's moral philosophy, Again, don't worry. When we get to them, I'm going to dumb it down so that we could follow it. But right now, we just have to understand the difference between moral realism and moral relativism. So, how do we justify one value over another? This raises a fundamental question in philosophy. Okay, so moral realism is the belief that the morality of an act has an objective status that we can know. Most philosophers we study are realists. They believe there is a right way for the polis to live. So polis is just basically the political community. Okay, so moral relativism, on the other hand, is the belief that good and evil are relative to the society of the judge. Okay, so if your society thinks and acts, if your society thinks an act is right, it is right for them, right? For you, right? So if you live in a society that believes that throwing acids in the face of a young woman who is without hijab is the right thing to do, then given that that society judges it as the right thing to do, then apparently that's the right thing to do. Okay, apparently, according to moral relativists. So that's how they judge it. Does your society agree with it? Then it's okay. Does your society disagree with it? Then it's not okay. So the same act could be good or bad depending on the society you live in. Okay, if your society says don't throw acids in women's faces, that's bad. Then that's bad over there. But if another society says, oh no, if she's not wearing the hijab, throw acid in her face, that's good. Then apparently, according to moral relativists, who are you to tell them they're wrong? They have decided that this is right. So for them, it's right. Okay, so this is the difference between having different opinions but one reality, or having different realities. Okay, it's kind of like moral relativism and moral realism just is kind of similar to just relativism and realism as a whole, right? So by the way, for you to better understand the difference between these two, here's a question that most people get wrong. All right, so if I say if I claim that there's this universal rule which says no society may impose its values on another. No society may impose its values of another. That claim, is that moral realism or is that moral relativism? So think about that. If I say no society may impose its values on another, so it might seem on its surface that that's moral relativism. But if you think about it, that's actually moral realism. Because I'm claiming that there is this universal rule that applies to everybody, right? So the moral relative version of that is imposing your values on another person. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on the society that you're in. So a lot of people get confused by this because when I say you shouldn't impose your values on another, they think like, oh, so you're saying that we should respect their values or that their values are correct. That's not what this is claiming. It's not saying their values are correct. It's just saying that you shouldn't impose your values on them, right? And because it's introducing a rule that is true for every society, then this claim is actually moral realism. But if you say, well, no, some societies, if they think you should impose it, then that's right. If another society thinks you shouldn't impose it, then it's not right for them. That would be moral relativism. So it's important for you to pay attention to this detail so that we don't get confused in the future. Okay, so you guys understand. Good. All right, so as we go through these courses, we're going to go through time. First, we're going to go through the history. So instead of just talking about these concepts, we're going to go through the philosophers that introduced these concepts to us, and we're going to go through time and learn them with these philosophers as we go from one century to another and then from one decade to another. Okay, and this is, I think, the most interesting way of learning. Before we go to the modern times, we're going to also go see how the foundations of these ideas were created in ancient times and in pre-modern times, right? So we're going to go to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and then Machiavelli, and then finally we're going to get to the modern times, which has 3 phases. And I think that this is going to be more interesting because it's going to be more like a story of people rather than just talking about ideas. Okay, it's going to be more easy to digest. Oh, yeah, I'm saying, hey, sorry, I'm late. My kid had a birthday party. Oh, happy birthday to your kid. That's so sweet. No worries. Don't worry. Make sure you go watch it from the beginning, though, because we're gonna build upon these ideas that we talked about here. So it's important to have the strong foundation. If you can later go watch it. Right. So once we get to the modern times, the story of modern political in 3 phases. Right. So the history of liberal republicanism and its competitors can be seen in 3 acts. So we have Act 1, Phase 1, formation from the 16th century to the 19th century. And then Phase 2, the greatest challenges from 1914 to 1945. From 1914 to 1945. This is the time that it seemed like the liberalism and liberal republicanism, it seems to be over. It seemed to have been dead. It seems to be it seemed like it was like just a dream of some stupid naive philosophers in France and United States, and now we have to go back to what we had before. And then all of a sudden 1945 to present, which is the years of the triumph of liberalism and some growing pains, some modern challenges to liberalism, but mostly triumph. So let's look at each one of them. The formation, which is from the 16th century to the 19th century. This is when we get introduced to the idea of the social contract by John Locke, by Hobbes, by Rousseau. And then we had these are the years of the revolutions that put those ideas in place, made them actually the French Revolution and the American Revolution happen, right? So we had the rise of the social contract theory, the American and French revolutions, the development of capitalism and socialism at the same time. So this is when these ideas now first gets introduced to us, but then there's an attempt to put them in practice. And that's why we have revolutions, because we're going from the old model, which is the age of empires, to the new model, which is the age of nation states, right? So these ideas so liberal republicanism and its competitors are basically ideas attempting to manage societies going from the age of empires to the age of nation states. Right. So what was the right way to do this? What is the best way to do this transition? Liberal republicanism, fascism, communism, Islamism. Okay, you can see that eventually the liberal republicanism is what won. So then after phase 1, we go to phase 2, which is the Great Challenge, 1914 to 1945. This is when the 2 World War I and World War II happened. The Great Depression happened. And then we had major existential threats of communism and fascism to liberal republicanism, right? And then eventually, against all odds, but the reason why I say against all odds, because during this period, if you looked at the map, especially closer to the end years, like in maybe the 1935s, and between 1935 to 1940, if you looked at the map of the world, you could see that most of the world was the liberal republican model was being defeated. Most of the world has been captured by tyranny. It was either Nazis or communist or Japanese imperialism. It was just a few areas that wasn't one of these. So it seemed like the era of liberal republicanism was over. But then 1945 till now, after the defeat of the Nazis and the Japanese, and then eventually after the Cold War, These were the years of the comeback and triumph of and economic success of and personal liberties growing everywhere around the world. But then with that, we also had new challenges. So alongside all of that success, we had new challenges and the most important one is distributive justice, which is a value and a principle that is one of the biggest challenges to liberty, which we're going to talk about. And then there were some other challenges, that the extent of the personal liberties and the changing nature of society. Some of these are a threat to liberty. We could talk about that in future lectures. Okay. All right. So to know what our own ideas mean. So now let's put it all together. Political discussion in the modern era always takes place in societies undergoing unprecedented change. Okay, this is one of the biggest challenges of the politics in the in the modern era, because as soon as these superior principles showed up and made the world a better place, we are also started becoming much more technologically advanced. And because we're much more technologically advanced, that means that everything is changing on a much more rapid pace. And that means that these values that are working are going to be challenged much faster, and the challenges to it are going to come at it faster. It's really hard to be so. Not only you have proven yourself to be very effective, it has proven to be a superior method compared to everything else that came before it. But now it also needs to prove itself flexible, or it will die, or something else needs to take its place. Because just because you work doesn't mean that you are going to continue to work, given how fast things are changing. So flexibility is going to be something that we're going to be seeing if liberty could survive that in the next couple of decades. So understanding the architecture of our political system, its components, its values, and its inherent conflict is not about finding a single perfect solution. It's about gaining the clarity to navigate these tensions, to understand the arguments behind different views, and to make informed decisions about how we ought to live together. And this is basically what we want to do. We need to figure out what we're trying to do. This is the whole purpose behind studying politics, is to just figure out how to live side by side peacefully, and not only not be a cost to each other's well-being, but also to help each other to maximize all our well-being. So basically, politics is the art of living together, right? And that's what politics is the art of living together. So if we get better at politics, we are going to get better at living together. That's what's going to happen. And this is why it's important to get better at the art of politics. So yeah, guys, that was my TED Talk. I hope you guys enjoyed. Come again. Thank you. Come again. Okay. All right, guys. So fantastic. So I'm gonna go get ready for a discussion group. I hope this was helpful. Again, this is right now. This is for our members only. We're going to have a lot more like this for our members only. However, the first course, eventually, I'll make this one public so that more people will get introduced to these courses. But everything that comes after this will remain for members only. But this one, I think at some point, I'm going to make it public. Oh, thank you. Saying great lecture. You're saying, but Armin, how do you get better at politics? By coming here and listening to these lectures. And then we'll come here. Here's how you get better. We come here and we learn together. And then we go into our discussion group and we talk about them. And we use these things that we learned to see if we could apply them to the news and the things that are happening around us. That's how we do it. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to promote my course. My courses. Okay, that's how we do it. All right, guys, I'm gonna end the live stream so that it doesn't get too long, so that more people get motivated to watch this in the future. I appreciate all of you. I'm Israel Chai, Javid Shah. See you guys in our discussion group. Link to our discussion group is in the description. Okay, bye.